We are really honored to have winemaker Nick Weiss of Weingut Nick Weiss from the Mosel here to join us today. Nick's family estate is located in the town of Leiven on one of the Mosel's most famous meanders. Like many of the region's growers, Nick is focused almost exclusively on Riesling. I believe it's about 99%, if I'm not mistaken. And there were at least 25 at last count, so there's no shortage of Riesling there. But part of what makes Nick's estate so special is his impressive portfolio of historic vineyard sites and ungrafted Rieslings, dating back in some cases to the turn of the century before 1900. I mean, not the turn of 2000. And it is your dedication, Nick, to those very special sites that we're here to talk about today. So thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come and talk with us. With all the recent rain, the vineyards must be exploding a bit, but I know that something that's been on the mind of a lot of people, and we were discussing just in advance of this, was the frost. Can you just give the people who are listening who aren't located here in Germany a bit of what it looks like in the vineyards today?
My pleasure to be here. Yeah, we did have quite severe frost in about 2 weeks ago, especially in the Saar Valley, a tributary to the Mosel, which is located a little bit on higher elevation than the Mosel, and because the Saar flows into the Mosel, and it's embedded entirely in a middle range mountain chain that is called Hunsrück, and that's a fairly cool mountain chain. It's actually almost like we could call it a parallel valley to the Ruhr Valley, which is the second tributary to the Mosel. Both rivers are, you could call it, the cooler part of an already cool climate wine region like the Mosel. And when weather extremes like a frost occur, usually those two parts of the region are hit the most severely. And we had temperatures down to -4 degrees Celsius, which at this point was really hard on the vines. The shoots were out already up to 10 centimeters, and a lot of those vineyards, especially in these two tributaries, were hit terribly. And when I first got there 2 days after the event, I was really shocked because everything looked totally destroyed. The leaves were all like tobacco. They were dried out. They were frozen. What happens when a frost appears is that the water in the leaves freezes and it expands and it breaks up the vacuoles in the cells. The cell fluid containing membranes break up, and then the cell fluid oxidizes and the leaves dry out. They look almost like there's drought. And today I've been there again, and after a few days or more than a week has passed by, I was positively surprised because you can see the secondary buds growing new shoots. Of course, this will, be a delayed growing, and usually those shoots are not as fertile and don't carry as many grapes as the regular ones. But at least there's a chance that we will harvest at least maybe 10, 15, maybe even 20%, depending on a growing season, of a regular yield that we would harvest in a regular year. So I was positively surprised from what I saw today.
Good. We jumped right in there with the most topical element of what you're working on, but maybe we can back up just a little bit for those who aren't familiar with your wines and winery. Can you just situate us where you are, a little bit of the history of the estate and what your focus is?
Yes, my family has been living for more than 200 years in a small town called Leiven, where we are still today. This town is located halfway between the two cities Trier and Bernkastel, halfway on the right river side. We're about half an hour east of Luxembourg, so we're very close to you could call it tri-state or tri-country area where France, Luxembourg, and Germany meet. After World War II in the late 1940s, my grandfather decided to build a new winery outside of his hometown on a hilltop because his building in the town was too small for also starting a nursery, which he had planned at that point and which he did. So he needed more space. And he had a property on this hilltop and built a new winery that he called Nick Weiss St. Urbans-Hof. St. Urbans-Hof means St. Urban's estate. St. Urban is like a patron saint of the winemakers. And today, our winery has a vineyard surface of 50 hectares, located in the Mosel and in the Saar, like a little bit more than half of it in the Mosel, a little bit less than half of it in the Saar Valley, spread out over 8 different single vineyard sites. 6 of them are Grand Cru, as the French would call it, große Lage, first growth, highly classified. And we produce about 30 different wines, maybe some years more than 30 different wines per vintage, everything from bone dry to noble sweet to Trockenbier as a TBA with more than 300 grams per liter of residual sugar. So everything up there, everything from dry to sweet. And 99% Riesling from these different single vineyard sites. Very fascinating when you have such a lineup from one vintage on a table, and you have more than 30 wines that are all from the same grape varieties, same wine region, same vintage, same estate, same winemaker, same cellar, and they all taste totally different. It's really amazing. And that's just what we form as a lineup, as a vintage output. I mean, when I taste through my cellar, I have as many as 150 to 200 different batches, tanks, and barrels that are also all different, even though they're like should actually all taste the same because they're all made the same way. But that's vineyard. That's character of origin. And of course, also different ripeness levels, different selections, and different residual sugar levels, which is a very important element of style in a Mosel to work with. This is where we are located today and what we're doing, and this is us. And we also have the nursery. We do plant selection. We don't produce really a lot of vines anymore for other growers. We use it mainly to achieve highest possible quality for our wines, and also to save the old genetic structures of old Mosel Riesling vines, so to speak.
Perfect bridge. We couldn't have planned that any better. The next question that I wanted to ask was to have you talk a little bit about the portfolio that you have of old vines, sort of how that came to be and how they shape your wines differently than some of the more modern clones and vine material.
Yes. My family was able to purchase property or vineyard land in very good vineyard sites, but also in parts of those vineyard sites that have been never restructured or remodeled. No Flurbereinigung, as we call it in Germany. It's the word for land consolidation and landscaping. So these are vineyard sites that still look like 200 or 300 years ago. There's never been a bulldozer in there, constructing roads or building concrete walls in it or make it more mechanizable in any way. So you can still find the old terraces, old walls, cliffs, rocks, everything. You could call it ancient landscape and ancient viticulture. And many of those terraces are kind of enclaves where the phylloxera louse has never migrated into. So you find a lot of old vines, you find a lot of ungrafted vines, and that's really a treasure which we started to not to exploit, but to lift, to take in. One of those vineyards, for example, is a vineyard in Wiltingen in the Saar Valley, which was planted in the year 1900. And we do know the people who planted it in the first place. My father bought this vineyard, but not from these people. There were 2 or 3 other proprietors in between. But he knew that the first ones who planted were those people, and he contacted them. And so we found out about when it was planted and what was planted and so on. And it's a rather large contiguous parcel of 10 hectare, and 3 hectare have never been replanted since the year 1900. It's a common practice by winemakers, by growers, to replant every 30, 40, or 50 years, either because there are too many vines missing, or the post and wire frame is getting weaker. The wires get rusty, or the post break down, or maybe because they did a change of the grape variety, or the spacing of the rows got too small, and when they wanted to drive with a tractor through it, they made it wider, or whatever. But the 3 hectares out of the 10 there, they have never been replanted. Only when a single vine died, the vine got replaced. So people did until today, over 124 years, people did what I call eternal viticulture. What happens when you do that is, when a vine died for whatever reason, vines can die off because they get a disease, or somebody doesn't pay attention with the hoe and hits it with a hoe and it dies off, or an animal bites it off, or frost or drought or whatever. So when a vine died, it got replaced by a new vine, a young vine. And over time, replacing vines meant that the people who replaced the vines didn't buy those vines always in the same nursery. And of course, those vines were never of the same clone. So over the years, you create a structure of different vines, even though it's all the same grape variety. It's all Riesling, but a little bit different Riesling of different origins, of different genetic structures. Some of the vines produce grapes that are a bit greener, the others a bit more yellow, some ripen earlier, some later, some have more acidity, some less, some have more sugar content at harvest. So there's a variation, and this variation, this complexity, this higher resolution grape picture, if you want, this contributes to a very complex wine. And this is actually the secret, or the key to the finesse and the grandeur and the elegance of a wine from old vines. I mean, today we find wines from a lot of different countries that are called from old vines, or vieille vigne, or alte Reben, as we call it in Germany. And most people think that these wines are so good because the old vines root very deep and they reach water and nutrients easily, and let's say the root tree in the soil is much larger than what's above the surface. That's all, of course, that's all right and all true, and it plays an important role. Also, old vines are less vigorous, so they yield lower, which contributes to the quality. The osmotic pressure usually in less vigorous vines is lower, so you have smaller berries. Small berries means more flavor, because most of the flavors are located in the berry skin. So small berries means more surface, more flavors to the juice, to the volume in the berry. That's all true, that's all good, but it's not just that. In fact, it can even be of a disadvantage when vines get very old, because sometimes the sap flow doesn't work well anymore through you could call it the vein system, the artery system of the vines doesn't function as well anymore, and not every old vine produces great grapes, I must say that. it's rather the age of the vineyard, and that the vineyard itself is old with different ages of, or different levels of ages of the vines and different genetic origin, even if you have one grape variety like Riesling, like we have here. And when I joined my father at the winery in 1997, I asked him the question, why are the wines that come from those 3 hectare within the 10-hectare parcel in Wiltingen is almost so much better than the wine from the other younger parcels around it, even though the soil is actually the same terroir, the microclimate is the same. Well, he answered my question the same way I just did. I said, well, he said, well, they root very deep, and you know, they're less vigorous, and but that wasn't you know, that answer wasn't enough for me. I wasn't satisfied with that answer. So I said, why don't we try it out and cut scion wood from these old vines randomly, like a Sélection Mosel, and plant it out, and then we see what happens when the vines from the same, if the same vineyard is young. Yeah, we rejuvenate the vineyard, and so rejuvenate the vineyard. So we went in there really a day or two before we picked the grapes, my father, our vineyard manager, and myself, and we walked through and tasted different vines, and the grapes that we liked the most, those vines we marked with a band, and we really marked a lot of vines, like I don't know, 150, 200 vines. And in the winter months at pruning time, we cut wood and grafted the wood from those old vines on American rootstocks, and we made vines from it. And the next year, we planted them out. And we had a parcel close to the winery that my grandfather had planted with clonal material, which I call tin soldiers, which means clonal material, means that whole parcel was planted with vines that are genetically identical with the mother vine. So everything is the same. But those vines were old. They were more than 50 years old. And the parcel next to it, we planted with young vines that we cut in the way of a Sélection Mosel from this old vineyard. And 3 years later, when we had the first crop, we harvested the grapes. We pressed them separately, vinified them separately. So we had the wine from the old parcel, and we had the wine from the newly young planted parcel. And you would think that the wine from the old vines should be much better than from the young parcel. And that was just not the fact. The wine from the newly planted parcel was so much more complex. It was so much more, it had so much more pressure, so much more energy and power. It was amazing. My father said to me, you know what, I'm very proud. He said, you proved that it's not the age of the vine, it's the age of the vineyard, and it's the mix of the vines and the mix of different ages. Of course, it's about old vines, but it's about different old vines, different ages and different origin, even though we are dealing with the same grape variety with Riesling here. And at that point, I decided to select, together with my vineyard manager, select wood from the oldest vines that we can find. And we started you could call it investigative work. We went up and down the Mosel River and into the Saar and Ruwer, and went to a very famous estate. Went to we asked older winemakers if they have still an old vineyard, or if anybody knows where the oldest vines are growing in the best vineyard sites. And we found a lot of these old vines. We found vines that were planted as ungrafted vines before the phylloxera epidemic started. We found vines that were 200 years old, Riesling vines that were planted after the Congress of Vienna, when the Prussians took over the Rhine in that region and all that. And we cut the wood, grafted it. Of course, we grafted them because we don't want them to get killed by phylloxera, and we planted them out around the house and created what I call the Noah's Ark of the old Mosel genes, Riesling genetics, Riesling genes of the Mosel. And it's a unique project. What we collected together is not just unique and you can't find it anywhere else. It's also that we saved a lot of old vines. I mean, if you have a vine that is 150 years old, the chance that it's going to die off within the next 10 or 15 years is quite high. And the only way to save it is to cut wood, to propagate it in the so-called vegetative way, not generative, but vegetative way. Cut wood and you propagate it genetically identical that plant, and you transfer it into a very young vine. It would be like creating a clone of yourself, and all of a sudden there's you again as a baby if you want. So that's that way you could live forever. Oh, it doesn't work with human beings, but it does work with vines. And
not yet.
That's what we did. And this is the story behind how it all started with selecting and saving the Riesling history of the Mosel.
That is fascinating, Nick. That's such a treasure trove. I have two questions that follow on from that, one for me and one from one of our listeners. My understanding, actually, from an article that Christoph Raffelt has just written for Trink magazine that we'll be publishing shortly about this very topic, oldest vine Riesling in the Mosel, that before the advent of clones, there was actually an understanding among growers of Riesling as being not a variety, but a family, like Malvasia. Is that your understanding as well, that there was enough genetic diversity and variability within Riesling, and growers understood that and planted with that in mind?
Until I mean, there's this story about the last Prince Bishop ruling our region. His name was Clemens Wenceslaus von Sachsen, coming up with a law saying from now on there should only Riesling be planted in the Mosel. I think that's a myth. It's not quite true. I think Riesling became the major grape variety in the Mosel with the Prussians after the Congress of Vienna in 1815. It was just that the Prussians thought that this grape variety is the most suitable, and also that those were the wines that the Prussians preferred and liked the most, liked to consume the most. And that's how Riesling was spread over the Mosel. But of course, Riesling was already planted in the centuries before. But throughout the Middle Ages, we had, like in most regions, wine regions of the world, or of the world in those days, of Europe, there was a mix of different grape varieties. People were planting whatever survived the most, whatever brought the highest yields, and whatever brought the most sugar, or tasted maybe the best. But when it comes to varietal character, there was just no varietal character, and there was no vineyard character, because after fermentation, the wines oxidized quite quickly. The acetaldehyde in the wines took on the oxygen, and you had a rather oxidized wine with an oxidative note that didn't allow any grape varietal character to come through, and also no vineyard character. The quality of a vineyard was rather judged by the yields that it brought and the resistance to frost or weather extremes. But with the ability of sulfuring wine, you could prevent the oxidization process, and all of a sudden the acetaldehyde did not oxidize anymore. You could preserve the flavors, and you could preserve a varietal character in the wine, and you could preserve a vineyard character. And then very quickly, people found out that some varietals were just were better, more refined than others. And that's how those varieties were preferred and reached the dominance in a certain wine regions, just like Riesling did in the Mosel. What has always happened is that new grape varieties developed, and also spin-offs of grape varieties developed, and that depended on the tendency of mutating more or less. If you take the Pinot varieties, Pinot Noir, Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, Auxerrois, and so on, there's lots of spin-offs of, for example, Pinot Noir. It's sometimes hard to talk about a Burgundy clone, because with a Burgundy clone, you sometimes don't even know if the Burgundy clone is Pinot Noir, even though it looks like Pinot Noir. That's how fast these varieties mutate. With Riesling has a quite stable how do you say, chromosome or a very, very stable genetic program, the alpha helix, you know, the DNA, that's what I was looking for, that word, very stable DNA. So it doesn't mutate as fast. It does a little bit, otherwise you couldn't select clones, for example, but not as much. So Riesling as a grape variety was there. It was easy to identify and it was easy to propagate and to plant out. Until the invasion of phylloxera into Europe, growers would just go into their vineyard. They would know which vines in their, which plants in the vineyards produce the nicest grapes for the best wines. And if a vine was missing somewhere, they would cut wood, maybe several shoots from their favorite vine, and would stick it in the earth in the winter. And some of them would start rooting and growing in spring and summer, and there will be a new vine. This is how they did it. And this is how they did a plant selection. So what they did was the same thing that I did with my father and my vineyard manager in 1989, and sorry, 1997. And it was something that was common practice, and that people knew how to do it. They knew which vines were good and from which they would cut off shoots to replant. With the phylloxera coming into Europe, there was the necessity to graft vines on American rootstocks, and that was something that a regular vintner or regular grower could not do. This was done strictly by governmental institutions. The government wanted to control the plant propagation, wanted to survey it, also wanted to keep the research and science in their hand. In most countries, plant propagation was strictly done by the government, so growers had to go to governmental nurseries and had to buy their vines there. And at that point, the clonal selection was started, because the people who did the grafting, they also did the selection of the sign wood that they used to graft. They did the selection of the rootstocks. They also did the breeding, whether it was cross breeding or clonal selection, clonal breeding of the vines. And it got all more and more, let's say, I don't want to call it technical, but selective. So this variation, what is very important for complexity in the wine, got lost, because you have a breeding goal. You're breeding either you're looking for healthy vines, you're looking for vines that are yielding high, or you're looking for vines that are producing high, where the grapes are producing high sugar levels, or high acidity or low acidity, or whatever. So you're making it more monodimensional or single dimensional, and it's the same story like with cultured yeast, where you have just one yeast strain putting the aromatic fingerprint on the wine, instead of spontaneous fermentation, where several yeast strains contribute to the flavor spectrum, making it more complex. It's the same thing in the vineyard. Well, over time, vineyards got more and more, let's call it clonalized, not colonized, clonalized. They planted to clones, to tin soldiers. So you have a vineyard, let's say 1 hectare with 5,000 vines that are all the same, all of the same genetics, and they all ripen at the same time. They all taste the same flavor spectrum, same acidity levels, same sugar level. It's all the same. So you end up having a very one-dimensional wine, which simply said. And then at a certain point, people found out, oh, this old vineyard produced much better wine. Oh, it must be the old vines. No, it's not the old vines. It's because the mix of vines that is in there. And maybe, yes, it's also the old vines, because, you know, if you have a big complex root system, that of course is important and contributes to the quality. But still, it is the high resolution plant structure in such a vineyard. And today we are finding back to this, and I remember, you know, when we were still producing plants also for a lot of other wineries, and people came to the winery and bought their plants, their vines from us. They were some of the most famous winemakers, growers of Germany, Riesling producers, they would call us up and they would say, can you sell us some plants? And we would say yes. What kind of plants do you need? Well, Riesling, of course. I said, yeah, Riesling. But what? You mean the rootstock? Yeah. Oh, whatever you have. I have a heavy soil, or a slate soil, or whatever kind of soil. But no. But there's some more. There's some more about it. How about the clones or whatever? And so there were winemakers that paid a lot of attention to a lot of things. To I don't know, to what kind of barrels they use, or whether they do spontaneous fermentation or not, or how long they do maceration, all these things. But the vine, the actual assembly station of the wine, where everything comes together, that wasn't important to them. They were talking about terroir and about soil composition and microclimate, but the vine itself, it didn't play a role. It wasn't at their attention. And now this has changed big time. And the genes, or the genetic structure of not just one vine, of what you plant in your vineyard, that has come to the attention of more and more people, is very, very important. And in the future, I think this will also that will change viticulture a lot, because people are going to look for that.
That is also fascinating. Paula, before I jump back to you with your questions, we just have one question from Robert Dentis, who we're honored to have join us today. He is asking, even though you are 99% focused on Riesling, he's asking about your Pinot program and what you think of the future of Pinot in the Mosel. We know that Pinot has a long history there, interrupted significantly in the 20th century, but now back in full force. Maybe you could just speak to us about your thoughts on that.
Yes, a pleasure to answer this question. I have started a Pinot project in a vineyard site called Hofberg, which is here in the Mosel, not that far away from the winery. It's like 3 towns down the river from here. That is a vineyard site with gray slate soil, located almost like in a side valley of the Mosel, almost a bit Saar-like, if you want, Saar or Ruhr-like. And it is a vineyard site that is very suitable for Pinot Noir, because I prefer gray slate to blue slate when it comes to Pinot Noir with water, because all Pinot varieties need a good water supply. We are planning on doing like a high-end Pinot Noir project there. We're doing high density planting. We have picked a fantastic planting material from France for this project, and we have just started, and the vines have just been planted last week. So it's going to take a lot of years until we're there. So 3 years until the first crop comes out, and then we'll give it another 3 years until the vines root a little bit deeper. And then by the time the wine has aged in the barrel, I'll probably be I don't want to say an old man, but I'll be much older than I'm now. But I still look forward to it. And yes, Pinot Noir does have a history in the Mosel, more longer than people would think. Pinot Noir was already planted in the Mosel in the Middle Ages, and it was more widely planted in the late 18th, early 19th century, especially during the time after the French Revolution, when the revolutionary troops conquered the territories west of the Rhine. We were French for more than 20 years, and Pinot Noir spread out quite quickly then in many of the top vineyard sites of the Mosel. That's all documented history. Pinot Noir was planted, and with the Prussian time starting, like I said, 1815, after the Congress of Vienna, a lot of those Pinot Noir plants were taken out, and Riesling was planted. Pinot Noir, or red wine in general, was even prohibited in the Mosel until 1986. That was when it was allowed again for the first time. That was when my father planted Pinot Noir right away because he was curious to reintroduce it and to see it how it is, but it was never really pursued in a let's say like a serious way here at the winery. And I'm now starting to introduce it again, and I'm a great fan of Pinot Noir and also of Burgundy as a wine region and Burgundian Pinot Noirs, but also of the great Spätburgunders of Germany and or Pinot Noirs from all around the world. When they grow in a suitable or good region, I look forward to making Pinot Noir also here in the Mosel, and I'm not the first one. Many of some of my fantastic colleagues are years now great Pinot Noirs that I admire very much and which I respect very much. And yeah, so more about that in a few years.
See you again in 3 years. We've got some questions that have come up in the chat that are really, really fascinating. Stephen asks, is anything lost when propagating these old Riesling vines? A photocopy of a photocopy degrades with each additional copy. Is it similar with grapevines?
No, the great thing is that you don't have any copy, how do you say, faults or copy mistakes here, because when you cut cyan wood from an existing vine, it's genetically completely identical. It's there's no. I mean, I know what you mean with an old vine. The cell replacement in a plant doesn't happen as fast as it does in the cells of human beings or, for example, of animals. So that's not as drastic. That's not the problem.
Okay, fantastic. And then Tamlin asks, Nick, quite a bit of research has come out showing evidence that trees communicate with each other via phytochemicals and other signals using Tam, you're killing me with the vocabulary. Using my chorusing. Yes, thank you. Networks.
I just saw that.
You're not making my life easy. Do you think that vines, especially old vines, might do the same? And do you think this might be another reason why old vineyards are more resilient?
That's definitely the case. Well, first of all, this is something very also highly underestimated by in viticulture, and I'm sure this is in the future going to play a very important role. We know about the communication of, for example, trees, but also vines, but of trees amongst each other through a fungus network, like a mycorrhizal network, which is like a fungus network. Or mushrooms, when you have, for example, a pine tree forest, and there's a young tree just growing out of the ground that has been, that grows out of a pine cone. The older trees start to move away from it in order to leave it some room and also leave it some moisture so that tree can grow. They're kind of taking care of their kids. I mean, isn't that amazing? Trees do that. They communicate with each other. And if you have a proper functioning ecosystem in your vineyard, this happens in a very good way. And not only this, a lot of things happen in a very good way. That's why it is so important to have a biodiversity in your vineyard. You need a biodiversity of flora and fauna. You need a lot of different herbs. We are sowing out herb seeds of many, many, many different kinds of herbs. That you can also bring first of all, bring in a kind of a fertilizer that activates your soil life in order to support the soil biome as a living soil, a soil that builds itself by, first of all, growing organic matter, growing plants besides the vines, and also animals. They all contribute to that soil. They live in there, they die off. they reintegrate into that circle of life, you could call it simply, and the soil builds up. And with the soil also everything else, also, let's say, that is very important. If you use anything that disturbs it, like, I don't know, herbicides, for example, or you use herbicides or any spraying agents or fertilizers that disturb this, you create the opposite of what you want. You don't get more yield out of it, and you don't make better wine in it. It's the opposite. Your vineyard gets bad. So you have to support life and biodiversity in your vineyard, and this is what we're doing. And so the Tamlin's question is very important, and it's about something that in the future will play a very central role in viticulture, in my opinion. It all has to do with it, whether it is the treatment of the vines, plant protection, whether it is nutrient supply in the soil, whether it is the wine style. You know, if you have, I mean, it's very simple. What you put in your vineyard and what happens in your vineyard affects your grape production and affects your wine style. If you have too much, if you grow Riesling in the Mosel and you have too much potassium in your soil, and too much potassium ends up in your grapes, and if you do an ungentle pressing process, your wine gets soapy. Your Riesling loses focus. Your Riesling is just not. It loses its crispiness, its elegance. This is just one example, and now you can. Just think about it, how much the soil and whatever happens in the soil, whatever you put into the soil, does to your wine and your wine quality.
Yep, that's an excellent point. And we're mindful that we're just about at the end of our time here, but we have another question from Tam that I think is very much worth putting to you. She says, leading on from everything you've said, do you think that plowing the soil can damage or interrupt the underground communication, nutrient transfer networks?
I do. I think that aerating the soil in a way should be done, but not too often. When I was it sounds like I'm very old. I don't feel very old. But when I was a young winemaker, let me put it this way, when I was a much younger winemaker, I thought that it's very important to cultivate the soil a lot, because I thought cultivate the soil, you release minerals that you want to end up into your wine, because you get more structure and more texture, more contrast in your wine. I like minerals in the wine, and there should be good extract in the wine, of course. But I didn't think about all these interconnected things that happen in the soil. Today, or within the last years, I've learned a lot about it, and we don't cultivate the soil every year anymore. What we do is when we have a new planting, we would cultivate the soil to make it easier for the vines, first of all, to plant them, but also to root. But then we only take some herbs that grow very close to the vine, take that away in order to give it some air to breathe, simply said. If we want to aerate the soil, we take a hoe and we just do, let's say, like we just do like 3 or 4 hits and just slightly lift it up, so we get some cracks into the soil, but not turn it around entirely, like the whole surface is turned upside down. We don't do that. Just aerate it a little bit, and that allows the network to and to further develop. It doesn't destroy anything. It rather supports everything in the soil because it gets more air. Plowing, as in a steep slope to the most, it's hard to plow. You can, in some vineyards, you can use a winch with a steel cable. You can pull up a plow. In some others, you have to work with a hoe because you cannot work with a machine. But the plowing is just not good.
Okay, that's a really important point. Thank you. I think we are officially out of time, which is a shame because I have so many things I want to ask. Um, but where can people find you? We have a fair amount of following in the States right now and also some in the UK. Where can people find you, follow you, learn more about both your wines as well as a couple of your different projects?
We don't have a website where I write a lot about this. We have an informative website that is just for the general information on the winery. But I know that there are some articles around that were written about what we are doing. Some of them are in German, but some of them are in English. So I suggest to just Google Nick Weiss or Nick Weiss and the word nursery maybe, and then you'll find some information. But if there's more interest about it, I'm happy to answer questions via email or maybe even on the phone. And you can contact me via our central info email address at the winery, info@nickweiss.com. I'm happy to do that. So, or just come and visit me.
That's the best. Thank you so much, Nick, for taking the time to come and to talk with us today. I've learned so much, and it's been highly informative and makes me really wistful to go down and visit. It's been too long. Also, a big thank you to all of our listeners for coming out and taking the time to come out of your evening, your afternoon, your morning. We cover a number of time zones to join us. Thank you again, Nick. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to participate in Drink Talks. And thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Tammy. Great to see you again. And thank you all for joining us. And yeah, hope to see you all again, either in Germany or wherever you are.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Take care, everyone. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.